That morning, Eleanor stood in her garden, watching the sunrise paint her roses gold. But this wasn't a day for admiration. Today, justice would bloom. Hello, dear friends. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is a new story about revenge and justice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional life stories. Eleanor Whitmore had always believed that gardens were places of peace, not war. For 30 years, she had tended her small plot behind the cottage with the devotion of an artist. Every morning at 6, she would step outside in her old gardening apron, breathing in the dewy air that smelled of earth and possibility. The kettle would whistle inside, calling her back for tea, but first, always first, she checked on her roses, her tomatoes, her prize-winning dahlias. Her garden wasn't just beautiful, it was legendary. People came from 3 towns over to see Eleanor's blooms at the summer fair. Her tomatoes were impossibly red and sweet. Her roses opened like silk. Her secret? Years of careful experimentation, handwritten notes in leather journals, and recipes passed down from her grandmother. Organic fertilizers, companion planting techniques, even the specific times to prune under moonlight. She lived alone after her husband George passed, but she was never lonely. The garden gave her purpose. The neighbors became her family. Every week she'd share cuttings, offer advice, bring baskets of vegetables to the church. Her kitchen always smelled of cinnamon rolls or fresh bread, and the sound of the radio mixed with birdsong made her mornings feel whole. Then Vivian moved in next door. At first, Eleanor welcomed her warmly. Vivian was younger, mid-50s, elegant, with sharp eyes and a smile that looked practiced. She admired Eleanor's garden lavishly, asked 1,000 questions, took photos. "You're such an inspiration," Vivian cooed, sipping tea on Eleanor's porch. Eleanor, ever generous, shared freely. She gave Vivian seedlings, showed her the compost method, even lent her one of her journals. Just one, with basic notes. But something shifted when Vivian entered her first garden competition. She won 3rd place. Eleanor, as always, took first. But Vivian's smile at the award ceremony looked strained, her congratulations hollow. The next week, she stopped coming by for tea. Eleanor thought little of it, until the rumors started. It began subtly, like weeds creeping under a fence. At the farmer's market, Eleanor overheard 2 women whispering. "I heard Eleanor uses chemicals," one said. "Vivian told me." Eleanor froze, a basket of tomatoes in her hand. Chemicals? She had spent decades perfecting organic methods. She approached them gently. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear." They looked embarrassed and hurried away. More whispers followed. At church, at the library, at the garden club meetings. Vivian, it turned out, had been busy. Some kin diki mauso. Worse, Eleanor began noticing things missing. A particular heirloom tomato plant she'd been cultivating for years suddenly appeared in Vivian's garden. Same unusual purple stripes, same shape. Her rare lavender cuttings, even her soil blend recipe, which Eleanor had perfected over decades. When Eleanor confronted her, Vivian's face was all innocence. "Oh, Eleanor, are you accusing me of stealing? I bought these seeds online." Her voice dripped with false hurt. "Honestly, I thought we were friends." Eleanor felt heat rise in her chest. Vivian's smile turned cold. "Because from what I hear, you're getting forgetful." The words hit like a slap. Soon, Eleanor noticed people treating her differently, patronizing, doubtful. At the next garden competition, the judges barely glanced at her display. Vivian's entry, using Eleanor's stolen techniques and plants, won 1st place. That night, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, staring at her grandmother's journals stacked on the table. Her hands trembled as she poured tea that went cold untouched. For the first time in 30 years, her garden felt like a battlefield she was losing. But deep inside, something harder than stone was forming. Eleanor spent the next few weeks in calculated silence. She stopped going to garden club meetings. She stopped correcting the rumors. She played the part Vivian had written for her, the forgetful old woman fading into the background. But in truth, she was watching, learning, planning. She noticed that Vivian had become greedy. Not content with stealing Eleanor's plants, she'd started selling her secret gardening methods in expensive weekend workshops. 20 people at a time, $50 each. Eleanor read the article carefully. Every technique described was hers. Every secret was from her journals. One evening, Eleanor made a phone call to her nephew, Daniel, who worked in intellectual property law. She asked careful questions about plant patents, copyright on written materials, and photographic evidence. Not trouble, dear. Just... Next, she visited the competition archives and requested copies of every entry she'd submitted over 30 years. Photos, dates, descriptions. She gathered her journals, meticulously dated. She photographed her current plants with timestamps. Then she did something clever. She began leaving out a new journal where Vivian could see it, through the window, on the porch table. The recipe was elaborate, scientific-sounding, and completely fake. But there was one special ingredient listed, a common plant food that, when mixed with the specific, incorrect ratios Eleanor provided, would cause root rot within weeks. She watched through her kitchen curtain as Vivian, during one of her casual walks, glanced around and quickly photographed the open journal with her phone. Eleanor smiled into her teacup. The trap was set. 6 weeks later, something strange began happening in Vivian's garden. The plants that had been thriving, the stolen tomatoes, the rare roses, started wilting. Leaves yellowed, stems softened. Despite Vivian's frantic efforts, entire sections died. Eleanor watched from her window as Vivian paced her garden, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling garden centers for advice. Meanwhile, Eleanor's garden exploded into its most magnificent bloom in years. But Eleanor wasn't finished. The annual Grand Garden Festival was approaching, the biggest competition of the year, with judges from the State Horticultural Society. Vivian had already registered, no doubt expecting another easy win. Eleanor registered too. But she also did something else. She contacted the festival director with a formal complaint, backed by 30 years of documentation. Dated photographs of her original plants, her journals with timestamps, entry records proving her techniques predated Vivian's by decades, and testimony from longtime garden club members who remembered Eleanor teaching these exact methods years ago. She also provided screenshots from Vivian's workshop advertisements, showing Eleanor's techniques being sold as Vivian's own innovations. The director was shocked. An investigation was launched. On the day of the festival, Eleanor arrived with her most stunning display. Heirloom tomatoes in shades of purple and gold, roses that seemed to glow, herbs arranged like living poetry. Vivian's booth looked desperate, dying plants hastily replaced with store-bought ones, gaps covered with decorative signs. When the judges arrived at Eleanor's display, they weren't alone. The festival director and 2 officials from the Horticultural Society accompanied them. Eleanor presented her case calmly, methodically. She showed the journals, the photographs, the timeline. She explained how traditional techniques, passed through generations, had been stolen and commercialized. Vivian, confronted at her own booth, turned pale. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. "She's a bitter old woman who can't stand competition." "Mrs. Shaw," the director interrupted, holding up Eleanor's journals. "These are dated 15 years before you moved here." The crowd that had gathered went silent. One of the judges examined Eleanor's plants, then Vivian's. "These specimens," she said, pointing to Eleanor's display, "show decades of careful cultivation. These," gesturing at Vivian's, "are recently purchased from a nursery." Vivian's face crumbled. But no words came. The festival director made an announcement. Vivian Shaw was disqualified from all current and future competitions. Her workshops were being investigated for fraud. All prizes she'd won would be reviewed. Eleanor won first place, but more than that, she won back her reputation. As people approached to apologize, to congratulate, to thank her for years of generosity, Eleanor simply smiled and handed out seed packets she'd prepared. Gifts, as always. Vivian left the festival early, alone. The weeks following the festival brought swift justice. Vivian's workshops were canceled. The people who'd paid demanded refunds, and soon she faced multiple small lawsuits. Her garden, damaged by the sabotaged fertilizer and her own inexperience, became a brown embarrassment she hid behind tall fences. It detailed her decades of contribution, her generosity, and how she'd been wronged. Vivian stopped appearing in public. Her house went up for sale within 2 months. Eleanor heard through neighbors that Vivian had moved back to the city, her gardening dreams abandoned. For Eleanor, life returned to its gentle rhythm, but richer. The garden club apologized formally and asked her to teach monthly workshops. She agreed, offering them completely free. Her kitchen once again filled with neighbors, students, and friends. The scent of fresh scones mixed with laughter. Her journals, previously private treasures, were now being carefully transcribed to share with the community. Her legacy preserved and celebrated. One morning, as Eleanor pruned her roses, she noticed a young woman watching shyly from the sidewalk. I'm new to town. Eleanor smiled, setting down her shears. Come in. Years passed, and Eleanor's garden became more than beautiful. It became a symbol. The garden club established the Eleanor Whitmore Award for integrity and generosity in horticulture. Her workshops grew into a beloved community tradition, where dozens of people learned not just about plants, but about patience, dignity, and standing up for what's right. Eleanor never spoke Vivian's name again. There was no bitterness in her heart, only the quiet satisfaction of justice served and a garden that bloomed more brilliantly than ever. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by 3 generations of students and friends, Eleanor stood in her garden, now a registered historical site, and looked at the roses her grandmother had first planted, the ones she'd protected, and the ones she'd finally saved. Gardens teach us everything we need to know, she told the gathering. They show us that what you plant, you harvest, that beauty takes time. As the sun set golden over the flowers, Eleanor poured herself tea from her grandmother's pot and smiled. Because revenge, like gardening, is best cultivated with patience and always blooms in its proper season. Thank you for listening. Do you think she went too far, or did she simply take back her justice? Share your thoughts in the comments.